Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm happy to welcome you to the 8th webinar of a 10-part webinar series on International Biodiversity Law Post-2020. This webinar is part of the 17th edition of the course on multilateral environmental agreements organized by the UN Environment Programme and the University of Eastern Finland. I'm Dr. Elsa Tsioumani, lawyer by training, currently a Marie Curie Fellow at the School of International Studies at the University of Trento in Italy, working on governance of biodiversity and emerging technologies. And I have been following international negotiations on biodiversity for more than 20 years with the team of the Earth Negotiations Bulletin of the International Institute for Sustainable Development. It is with great honor and excitement that I introduce today a distinguished scholar and a very good friend, Dr. Frison. Christine is an FNRS postdoctoral researcher at the Law Faculty in the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium, as well as Associate Research Fellow at the University of Antwerp in the Netherlands and the Center for International Sustainable Development Law in Montreal, Canada. She's an expert in international environmental law with a focus on the law and governance of agricultural biodiversity. She has taught in several Belgian universities and has received 3 awards for her research. She has also conducted several consultancies for international organizations, including the European Commission, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the UN Environment Programme, and Biodiversity International. She has published numerous articles and 4 books, the last one focusing on redesigning the global seed commons, while her latest research dives into digital sequence information on seed varieties. Today, Christine will discuss a very timely topic, the governance of digital sequence information on genetic resources. As you may know, benefit sharing from the use of the digital sequence information, or DSI, is one of the thorniest issues in the current negotiations for the development of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Christine will unpack the issues at stake in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, and set the focus back on the need to respect the 3 objectives of both these treaties: conservation, sustainable use, and fair and equitable benefit sharing. Just a couple of housekeeping notes for viewers. Please note first that this webinar will be recorded. And second, please use the Q&A box for your questions. We will discuss them after Christine's presentation. So without further ado, Christine, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tsioumani. Elsa, thank you. I will share my screen and put the slideshow on. Please do let me know how this works. Is this good?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so good afternoon or good morning, everybody. I am very, very happy to be here with you today, and I warmly thank Harro and his team for the invitation. As Elsa mentioned, I will try to explain in a very limited amount of time very complex questions that are arising today in international environmental negotiations. The title of my presentation is The Global Seed Commons, Digital Sequence Information and the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So first of all, I will skip this because Elsa has very thoroughly introduced me. Thank you. So today I will try first to give you a very quick glimpse of the general context. What is the food and agriculture context we're diving in? I will then explain to you as clearly as possible what is this Global Seed Commons and explain to you the functioning of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Then I will briefly explain to you the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework negotiation process and show you where the issue of digital sequence information is creating difficulties in these negotiations. I will try to explain to you what digital sequence information are and what's the problem at stake, and eventually make some suggestions as a way forward. So the food and agricultural system, we know that it creates a lot of difficulties, especially nowadays with climate change. It is an issue that comes out more and more often in the news. What are the difficulties? They're related to food production and waste management, to the erosion of agrobiodiversity. There are questions related to poverty and dependency on food and agricultural change, health issues regarding nutritional value, for example, equitable access to food, etc. So today we won't cover all of these very interesting questions, of course, we won't have the time. So a very quick historical timeline. When agriculture started to develop more than 10,000 years ago, seeds, and I will talk about seeds as a short for plant genetic resource for food and agriculture, seeds were exchanged in a very unfettered manner, and this allowed for the development of the diversity in varieties and plants that we consume today. This is a map that can express quite nicely how this global movement has enabled many different regions in the world to develop varieties that are adapted to their local environment and to the tastes of people living there, but also to be able to cultivate and grow these seeds in many different parts of the world. Jumping now to post-Second World War agricultural development, there has been a very important acceleration in the industrial development of agriculture, and that means using chemical entrants, high mechanization, and modifying, adapting agricultural practices in order to systematize and facilitate the work of farmers. So this industrialization of agriculture has reached quite an important or significant point where we are now facing a very limited number of mega industries that cover different sectors, so the mechanization, the production of seeds and chemicals. So this is a graph that has been developed by a colleague, Philip Howard from Michigan State University. There is a more recent update graph which shows even higher concentration of these key agricultural stakeholders in the global market. There has also been a transformation in the role of farmers who are now considered as end users and as implementing what other stakeholders recommend them to implement. So providing them the seed, the chemicals, the techniques to produce agricultural products. So this is for the global development of agricultural production. On the other hand, there has also been a very significant trend over the last decades in the erosion of biodiversity and agrobiodiversity. So we have many reports that highlight these erosion, recent reports from the IPBES, of course, but also some information from the IPCC reports or various FAO reports, who all indicate that we are losing a lot of diversity in plants and agricultural plants, and of course animals too. Another piece of information to keep in mind is the structure. Who are these stakeholders in the agricultural food chain, and what are their role? So these reports here highlight that approximately 70% of our food is produced by smallholder farmers. And very strikingly, these smallholder farmers are those who suffer the most from poverty and malnutrition. So here there's really a key question on this whole system that seems not to function efficiently. Coming to a historical timeline of seed exchanges, as I said, in immemorial times, you had this movement of seeds which accompanied humans who were traveling around the world. After the Second World War, and in particular since the 1980s, there has been an appropriation trend of these seeds through legal tools. And these tools are intellectual property rights and state sovereign rights. So this has created a restriction in the access and in the flow of these varieties. And so the question is, what do we want for the future? I will explain to you in a few minutes that with the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, there has been an attempt to answer this restriction in the access, which is key, of course, because if we want to be able to continue to produce food and grow plants that can adapt to variations in the climatic conditions, we need to be able to access to as many diversity as possible. So this unfettered access is key, and this is what the international treaty tried to address. So I was mentioning these two different legal ways of controlling seed access, intellectual property rights being one, like patents, for example, or state sovereign rights, which is what the Convention on Biological Diversity and its Nagoya Protocol are implementing, for example, but also the international treaty. And you also have technological tools that enable this control in seed access and replication. And I am sure you have all heard about the GERT seed or Terminator seed, so to be called. So how does the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resource for Food and Agriculture function? What is its role? It was adopted by an FAO resolution in 2001, and it is a legally binding instrument, similarly to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which functions in harmony with this convention. What are the treaty's objectives? Well, again, similarly to the CBD, three main objectives: the conservation of agricultural seeds, their sustainable use, and their facilitated access and benefit sharing. There are also key clauses that develop conservation in situ and ex situ in the treaty, and ways to enhance their sustainable use. In its Article 9, you also have a recognition of farmers' rights, which is a very, very important international concept. Unfortunately, I will not be able to dive into this today, but I highly recommend that you do. And finally, the fair and equitable sharing. This is developed through what has been called a multilateral system of access and benefit sharing. And these three key objectives aim at attaining the overall goal of food security and sustainable agriculture. So what is the scope of this Global Seed Commons? Well, first, the treaty is applicable for all plant genetic resource for food and agriculture. However, the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing only applies to a list of crops and forages that are annexed to the treaty. There are 64 varieties listed in this annex, and these varieties have to be under the control of the contracting parties and in the public domain. So these three key objectives are supposed to be implemented through this multilateral system of access and benefit sharing. And this system functions in with two different important elements. First, the facilitated access. So this happens through a virtual common basket of seeds. There is no putting together of all the seeds of all countries, contracting parties in one building and somebody managing this. It doesn't happen like this. It's a virtual basket, and you may access this basket through a standard contract, which is called the Standard Material Transfer Agreement. So this facilitated access is possible for the list of crops and forages annexed to the treaty. They are accessible for all stakeholders in contracting parties, and that includes farmers, although farmers are not the primary stakeholders in using directly and accessing these varieties through the standard contract. This happens, this access is allowed for research, breeding, and training purposes when they are related to food and agriculture. So if I am a breeder and I would like to access a wheat variety to create a new cosmetics for my to be commercialized, then this is outside of the scope of the international treaty, and it goes back under the scope of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is one element. The second instrument is the benefit sharing mechanism. And this happens through a benefit sharing fund, which is a sort of collective trust account, which funds farmers' projects for sustainable use of seeds. And these projects mainly are mainly funded in developing countries, contracting parties to the treaty. So how does this function in practice? And I will try to be clear here. It's very complex. I'm a user, and I would like to access some of these seed varieties that contracting parties, international organizations, or natural and legal persons are putting into this Global Seed Commons. So I will ask a provider to use a variety. I will use a standard contract to access this material. I will work on it. I might even pass it on to a second recipient, and this happens systematically through a new standard contract. And once a user or a developer has developed a product to be sold on the market, then two options happen. Either the developer will take some intellectual property rights over this new variety and therefore restrict its access to commercialize it. In that case, the developer has to feed back to the benefit sharing fund a percentage of its net sale. If yes, and then the benefit sharing fund can also be funded with various other means, donations from other sectors, whatever. If the material is not protected with intellectual property rights, it means that it remains within the realm of the Global Seed Commons and is still freely accessible for its users. Then there is no compulsory payment to the benefit sharing fund. And once we have money in the benefit sharing fund, this money is distributed, as I said earlier, to fund development projects on conservation and sustainable use in developing countries. And this whole system is managed by the governing body of the treaty. If some of these development projects working on varieties and identifying varieties or developing new varieties, this may happen, for example, through public-private participation projects, well, this material will be sent back in the Global Seed Commons. Now, on paper, this seems to be very nice. This seems to answer some of the problems that I identified earlier in the current agricultural landscape. However, in practice, this system encounters some difficulties. First, the fact that the appropriation of seed remains very prevalent in the system. We can see that we have not reached the very big facilitated access that we were hoping for when the treaty first came into force. A second key constraint is the little participation of some key stakeholders, and in particular smallholder farmers, in the multilateral governance system of the treaty. So this creates an imbalance of rights that penalizes farmers, but also seeds diversity. And of course, this has to be solved if we want to face current agricultural production challenges. So realizing this, in 2013, the governing body of the treaty decided to reopen the negotiation to enhance this multilateral system. And I will not go into the detail of this negotiation process. Since 2013, this negotiation is open and it still has not come to a conclusion, unfortunately. One of the reasons being, the main reason, is the very important shake that digital sequence information has created when it's penetrated the negotiation fora in the seed treaty, but also in CBD related fora. One other important element to note is that the ongoing solutions that are proposed to enhance the multilateral system and its funding strategy, they all remain in this appropriation paradigm, as I call it, which means that we consider and value seed mainly as an economic good, improved varieties that in a very technological way, and forgetting or not seeing that seeds are much more than that, and that they answer and cover many other aspects of people's lives, which is why it is so important to facilitate their access to everybody. So in my own research, and I will go very quickly because it's not the topic of today, but in my own research, what I've done to try to propose a solution or a way forward is to understand better how this multilateral system functions as a commons. So you have several authors who have suggested that the seed treaty was functioning as a global commons, and they were inspired by Elinor Ostrom's work, who published a very interesting book on governing the commons. You see it here on the left top of this slide. I will not go into the details. But what is key to remember is that the collective dynamic is key, and that all stakeholders who are involved in the use and development and conservation of seeds should be at the negotiation table to design together governance rules that would enable to reach the set objectives of food security and sustainable agriculture, and facing the erosion of biodiversity problem. So this is something that I've worked on, trying to see how this commons theory could be could help the enhancement of the multilateral system of the seed treaty. I have identified several principles that I believe are key for this enhancements to take place. Unfortunately, this is not happening. And this is not happening because meanwhile, in 2016, the issue of digital sequence information arrived in the negotiation fora under FAO, the seed treaty, but also under the CBD. And this issue has really troubled the negotiation process. So, as I said, in 2013, at the 5th governing body of the treaty, they reopened the negotiation in the view to enhance its functioning and enable reaching the treaty's objectives. 4 years later, at the 7th governing body of the treaty, there has been a complete blockade during the negotiation because contracting parties could not agree on the issue of digital sequence information. Developing countries wanting to address this question in the governing body session and to schematize developed countries refusing to address this problem. That resulted 2 years later at the 8th governing body session in, well, basically no progress at all. And today, so the 9th governing body was supposed to take place in November this year, 2021. But we are only having a 2 days online virtual session, basically to handle budget and administrative issues, because the next governing body meeting is scheduled for May 2022, after the next conference of the parties of the CBD taking place live in Kunming, China. So you can see here that these various fora are very, very much interlinked. and that what happens in the CBD has a very strong impact on what happens in the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resource negotiations. So what about the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework? Well, first of all, what is it? It's roughly speaking, a sort of policy agenda that is designed for 10 years for the CBD contracting parties to give them a direction, general trends, general objectives. So this framework will be adopted at the 15th Conference of the Parties. It was supposed to be in 2020, but of course with COVID, it has been delayed. And this will really feed the 2050 vision, which is entitled Living in Harmony with Nature, which you can find online if you click on the link here. I also recommend you, if you're interested in the process of the negotiation of this post-2020 framework, to have a look at Decision 1434, which explains the process of this, the design of this framework. Basically, there is open-ended intersessional working groups that are taking place under the leadership of two co-chairs. It's always a co-chair from a developed country and a co-chair from a developing country. It's supposed to be a very comprehensive consultation process, which will include provisions that are both global and regional, but also thematic, with consultation meetings. So it's supposed to be quite inclusive. And this framework will be presented at COP at Kunming, sorry, in April 22. So this is the first draft that was published a couple of months ago, early September, which proposes a first agenda for this framework. Unfortunately, although it is a very important document up to now, and there has been significant consultations and technical work going on, there still has not been really key negotiation on the framework. So these negotiations will resume early next year in Geneva. So we will see if and how the digital sequence information issue is handled during these negotiations. Up to now, as you can see, digital sequence information is mentioned as a key element to be addressed. And we have, this is document, you can also find it online, which explains where we are now and the political issues at stake. So it's really reaching an agreement on this item will either block or disentangle the policy agenda for the next 10 years, both in the CBD fora, but also in the FAOC treaty. But so what is digital sequence information? It is more than time for me to try and explain this to you. And I apologize, I am not a geneticist, I'm an international law lawyer. The work that is presented here now has been carried out with Sylvain Aubry, from Switzerland, a colleague, and several other researchers from various universities in Europe. You'll find the reference later. But so, why is digital sequence information an issue here? When you read the Convention on Biological Diversity, and it's very similar in the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, you see that we have definitions for genetic resources and genetic material. So genetic resource, and it's in the CBD Article 2, is defined as genetic material of actual or potential value. And genetic material is defined as any material of plant, animal, microbial, or other origin containing functional units of heredity. And so depending on how you interpret these definitions, well, you can either consider that the digital sequence information is part of the genetic resource, or that it's not. I will skip this one here. This is what I wanted to show you. So basically, depending on how you interpret, either DSI are within the scope of the CBD and the Global Seed Commons, and that of course implies that all the rights and obligations for contracting parties to these treaties and conventions are applicable to the access and use of DSI. If you consider that DSI are not part of the genetic resource, then this means that all the rights and obligations of these treaties and conventions do not apply to the access and use of DSI. And of course, this has a very, very strong implication for benefit sharing obligations. I will not try to explain into detail what are DSI, but there will be some references at the end of this PowerPoint presentation for those who want to have access to them. What you need to understand and remember is that depending on what you understand to be digital sequence information, well, the level or degree of what can be applied in the CBD and the Seed Treaty will vary. So you have different publications which suggest different understandings and definition of this term, digital sequence information, and not everybody agrees on this the use of these terms neither. It's more used as a placeholder term. What the problem is really is, oh, sorry, there, is that we are using more and more big data, and of course we have examples. You might have heard about the Genome Project, for example, or the Taiwan Biobank. These are projects where a very, very high amount of genomes, whether human or plant, are sequenced and then treated within these biobanks. Another key element which helps understanding why there is a problem today is the fact that today sequencing can be very cheap and is very easily accessible anywhere. Of course, I'm not able to do that, but I think any geneticist who has the material can carry it out. The third element is that there is a question on what do we do with this DSI. Of course, there is this hope that it will enable and facilitate the better use of these genetic resources. And there are many different applications, which again, I will not enter into detail because I'm not competent. But with these various applications, you have different legal tools attached to these applications that will either facilitate, enhance, or limit and control the use of the sequence information. And there's a whole debate going on with the open access to these sequence information. So basically, we have, this trend has really accelerated. Here you have examples, for example, in human genetics that are taking place, and we have seen that with COVID, for example, access to rapid access to genetic information on the virus has been really key. So, for example, if we take here the World Health Organization PIP framework, so the Pandemic Influenza Preparedness Framework, this is a framework that aims at facilitating this exchange and access of information and material in order for countries to face pandemics in a rapid and efficient way. So today, where are we in the negotiation process? We have several international negotiation fora that are struggling with this digital sequence information issue, the CBD, as I mentioned, and the design of the Post-2020 framework, the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, but also negotiations that are taking place within marine genetic resource. There is a negotiation to design a new international treaty to manage and govern the access and use of marine genetic resource outside of states' jurisdiction. And there too, there are issues with DSI. So with my colleagues, Sylvain Aubry and others, we try to reflect on a way to answer these blockade. One of the things we thought was to try to take a few steps back first and put these various fora to talk to each other. Because the question of DSI is relevant in each of these fora, and I'll skip this one. Sorry, I'll skip this one too. I wanted to reach, yeah, this is the slide I wanted to reach. And I see that I have spoken 40 minutes, but I'm reaching my conclusions. So here, if we could facilitate a discussion with all these different fora to understand what DSI are and how do we use them and where we want to go, then perhaps we think that it could help or contribute to enable all these environmental treaties to reach their set objectives. I will not go through the proposal, the detailed proposal that we make, but I encourage you to read our publication if you're interested. However, we are conscious that solving this DSI issue will not necessarily solve the fundamental dysfunctioning that occur in the access and benefit sharing mechanisms. So what could be done, I think, well, first, I really think that we need to recognize and address the deep-root conflict that still exists between countries from the global north and countries from the global south. And I think that the DSI question has just highlighted once more with a different face, but it's the same problem, the same deep-root conflict that exists between these two set of countries, and namely the issue of decolonialization. I think that we also, and it's linked to that, of course, have to address the material, but also the immaterial misappropriation of biodiversity, whether physical resource, but also its immaterial information. I think that we also have to recognize that the benefit sharing is not functioning as hoped by countries from the global south, and we have to be able to hear that and address it in an honest manner. And this also means that we have to take into account the capacities of countries. So enabling open access to DSI is not sufficient, is clearly not a sufficient benefit sharing element, according to me. Something that's really clearly lacks, I think, in the ongoing negotiation is refocusing on conservation objectives. I mean, the CBD, the international treaty, all these environmental agreements were designed because there is an erosion of biodiversity, so we have to address conservation policies. And this means that we have to do it by including all stakeholders, and also the very first stakeholders living in these areas, so local communities, indigenous people, farmer communities, etc. I think that working on recognizing the diversity of values of seed is also perhaps could also help the debate. For now, the CBD and the international treaty, they're very much focused on the commercial value of the seed. So perhaps enlarging this to the spiritual, cultural, nutritional, social, medicinal values of this diversity could help to imagine other ways of governing these access and use. And then finally, addressing the power imbalance in the international governance fora. So the work I've done on the commons is one way to look at that, but you could also look at that using Amartya Sen's capability theories. There are many different ways of addressing this issue, but I think it has to be named and addressed. So I think I'm done. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it was not too much information. I do realize that it's very dense, but I thank you for staying with me throughout the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine, also for presenting so complex matters in such a clear way. We do have some questions already, and we still have 10 minutes for discussion. So I'm going to go through the questions in the Q&A box. So the first one, I mean, it's also a comment. So DSI, in my view, is genetic resourcing. Isn't the proposed DSI an attempt to amend the Nagoya Protocol through the back door for countries who are not even state parties to the convention? And more so without benefit sharing with the country where it was sourced. I guess this will go us back to the interpretation that you were talking about, or also, you know, the rationale of negotiating positions of different countries.
Yes, exactly. I mean, there's not much more I can say than what I said in the presentation. Indeed, it's a matter of policy position mainly. My own interpretation would also tend to include DSI in the definition of a genetic resource, I am convinced that no matter the form that the information takes, what is important in the genetic resource is the traits, the characterizations that are embedded in the resource, and that's why you develop a new variety with this or that trait. So separating both elements, I also believe it's a bit fictitious. Is that an English word? Like it's not real. It's a fiction. It's a construction, basically. And yes, the question with benefit sharing, of course, this is why I really think that beyond benefit sharing, we have to address the issue of colonization and decolonization. I mean, we do have to recognize that Western countries are rich today because they have used resources from the global South. This is just a fact. It's not an opinion, an ideology, it's just a historical fact. And we have to address that. So I think addressing that might actually solve the whole conundrum with the benefit sharing mechanism.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I completely agree, of course, you know. I mean, yes, what happens in the CBD fora is another thing, but yeah, we definitely need to discuss these things openly for any chance to have progress internationally. Okay, I'm passing to the next question. Are there overlays or gaps between these treaties? I think this comment came when you were discussing the different fora where the DSI issue is being addressed. So like CBD, ITPGR, BBNJ, and all that.
Yes. So basically, in international law, we have a sort of, it's not a hierarchy, but the Convention on Biological Diversity would be the framework convention covering all biodiversity under state sovereignty, of course. But then if you have specific treaties like the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources addressing a specific category of resource, then that treaty becomes the relevant one to govern that resource. But of course, what happens to all all biodiversity that is not situated in the under state sovereign rights? Well, yes, this can be considered as a gap. This is why there is now an ongoing negotiation for marine genetic resource outside of state's jurisdiction. But yes, potentially there can be elements that are not covered by treaties. Now, is this good or bad? I don't know. It depends on what we want to do with this resource. So it's quite a technical international law issue to understand under which treaty, convention, or protocol the resource is attached to. But this is yeah, all that I can say. Unless you give me with a very specific example, then maybe I can provide some more detail, but that's what I can say on a general note.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christine. Okay, we have a couple of questions more. So, I mean, if DSI is not part of the genetic resource, then where does it come from? Can it be there on its own? I guess it's a reasonable question.
Well, I would say no. Again, I'm not a geneticist, so maybe there's something I do not grasp there. But of course, sequencing happens from something, from a material, a resource, a plant. The issue that arises is then that the sequencing translates this information into a code, and this code can be shared very easily and without the need to trace it or to link it to the resource from which it was sequenced anymore. So this is why it's problematic, and this is why some consider that yes, it can be separate from the genetic resource, because once it has been coded, it's just out there and it's published. It's part of scientific publications and research projects, and yeah, that's what I can answer to this.
Yes. Okay, since we have 3 minutes left, I'm going to go for the most upvoted questions. So what could you say to persuade developing countries to develop consensus on DSI with other regions or countries and reach on a global pact to achieve the goal of living in harmony with nature? It's a rather existential question. Yeah,
it is a very existential question. I think it's rather developed countries who need to be persuaded to achieve this goal of living in harmony with nature, rather than developing countries. But maybe I don't have an impartial view. I don't know. What I do know is that the tensions that arise with DSI are clearly related to this feeling that developing countries do not receive a fair and equitable compensation for what they have been in the past providing to the world and to developed countries, and continue to do so. So I don't know. I really don't know what clear-cut argument could persuade negotiators to agree on this goal. If I knew, I think we would already have solved the problem.
Yes, no, I agree. No, it has taken almost symbolic political importance, the issue of DSI, both for developing countries and also for developed countries. I don't think it's, arguments can do a lot. Anyway, the last question, in your view, how can the interests and influence of key stakeholders be assessed?
That's a very good question. It's actually the key focus on a research project that I would like to work on in the coming years, because I believe that rendering visible this power imbalance, so which stakeholders have the more weight and influence in the negotiations, I think that rendering that visible would really help in facilitating a more balanced negotiation process. I also believe that changing governance rules could help, and this is some of what I proposed in my book published in 2018, setting principles, governance principles that enable a true and effective participation of all stakeholders. And I had one slide which I went through very quickly in my presentation, showing to you how the FAO Committee on World Food Security functions. This committee has gone through a reform in 2013, where now it is not only states, so contracting parties, that sit at the negotiation tables, but all key stakeholders. So this means that instruments that come out from this negotiation are very much more equitable and balanced. And one very good example is the recent United Nations Declaration on Peasants' Rights, adopted in 2018 as well by the United Nations General Assembly, which shows that this more inclusive governance system can function. But so yes, first we need to assess what are the roles and influences of these stakeholders. So this is definitely something that we academics have to work on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christine. It was awesome. I hope you all enjoyed it. We are 2 minutes over time already, so I think we'll have to stop here. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation and the discussion. So until next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was very nice to be here with you today. Goodbye.
Bye.